3, 2, 1. Hi, everyone. Richard Tanson here from your International Studies Office. I'm presuming most of you know me, but if not, I am the senior person in the International Student and Scholar Programs. And what we're going to do tonight, Mark and I do this every year. I'm going to go over the OPT requirements. Mark will backfill as is relevant to what he's going to talk about after I finish. And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I think some of you must notice that this is the PDF slide presentation from our website. You're also welcome, as always, to make an appointment with an advisor in the ISSP in order to get more details. This is especially relevant now, both for students who are graduating in December. The OPT filing period is now open, and for those graduating next spring. So let me just begin by talking about what OPT is. And again, I'm going to keep this fairly elementary from the beginning so that this will provide fertile ground for questions later on for both myself and for Mark. The main thing to bear in mind is this: all students who are degree-seeking students are eligible for a 12-month period of OPT per each higher degree level. So that's the fundamental right there. An F1 student always needs work authorization to work outside the university. It's one of either of two forms of practical training: CPT, curricular practical training, or OPT, optional practical training, which we're talking about tonight. As you can see, you are permitted to apply for the OPT no earlier than 90 days prior to the end date of your I-20. So if the I-20 is not correct, you're graduating earlier, then you would ask us to shorten. If you need more time to finish your studies, that's another conversation, because I think we all remember that we cannot let the I-20 expire while you're engaged in your studies. So you would apply in your final semester of study for most students. No more than, but certainly as of the 90th day forward. And again, very important point here, you don't need a job offer. A job offer is not required to make the application for OPT, nor should you wait. Very important that you apply as early as possible, especially if you're fairly sure you're going to graduate in December. We'll talk about OPT and CPT usage. This almost never happens, but just so you know the rule, curricular practical training, that is the form of work authorization which we authorize while you are still a student. Again, no work without one of the two forms of practical training. If you just, again, so you know the rule, if you exceed 12 months of full-time CPT, then you have negated your eligibility for OPT after that degree level. We try to make sure this never happens. Any part-time CPT does not count towards that disqualification. But this is a point, the third point is a point I want to make. It's something that we emphasize to individual students as well as on our website. And Mark, maybe you'll back me up on this. We're very concerned about students who, even though CPT at a part-time rate may not find themselves disqualified for OPT, our concern is that if you use too much CPT, it becomes harder and harder to justify that this is actually training, in service to your degree program rather than simply employment. And that's not really the intention of CPT. So we caution everyone from the outset that if you use too much CPT, immigration may not like it. So you should always consult with us if you believe you're sort of skirting that boundary.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in really quickly, that is an excellent point, because where this becomes important is in the next stage of your journey to stay in the United States. Your first stage is going to be OPT. The second stage is going to be the H-1B. And when you file for the H-1B work visa down the road, which I'm going to talk about later, that is when the Immigration Service is going to look back at your entire student history, and they're going to want to look at your CPT, they're going to want to look at your OPT employment. And it's at that point that you're going to have to prove that the work you were doing was actually related to your academic program. So Richard's point is excellent. And let me just also say that I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting OPT after you graduate. Because in the end, getting OPT is going to be your first step in remaining in the United States and working in the United States after you graduate. I don't care what you read on the internet, 99% of every international student will start their journey using optional practical training. You all are very lucky that you have an excellent, knowledgeable international student services office. And they can definitely help you get OPT. And I cannot emphasize enough, learn the information that they provide, use the resources they provide so that you make sure to get your OPT to be able to stay in the US after you graduate. And I'll turn it back over to Richard.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah.
Richard, this is Heather. I didn't want to interrupt, and I don't know if you have a hard and fast answer, but one of our questions was, how much is too much CPT?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if there's a number or.
Yeah, it's something that, quite frankly, they should always consult with our office, even before they start looking for the next position. I think it's a worthy conversation. So let's just leave it at that for now, and we'll move on. Thanks.
Perfect.
Heather.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just so you have a basic understanding, I mean, this is just a laundry list, quite frankly, of the kinds of employment opportunities that can be listed, the categories under which they could fall. But quite frankly, let's just crystallize it even more than that. When you're working under OPT, you have to find a job that is directly related to your major. That is really the most important criterion. Any job has to be related directly to your major field of study. So minors don't count, has to be a major. Obviously, if you're a graduate student, tied to your program of study. Is it possible to be self-employed, for example, under OPT? Yes, but, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But the main thing is OPT is employment authorization to work after you graduate outside of the United States. Again, you get 12 months of OPT, no matter what your program of study. Everyone is entitled to that who is maintaining their lawful F1 status in the United States. So how does this all work? Because, you know, I don't need a job in order to apply for OPT. So how can I make sense of what I'm supposed to do with the OPT application when I'm applying dutifully 90 days or so prior to the end of my program? So one thing, I mean, a bell that I'm going to ring all night long, because we have student after student that keeps making this mistake. You make your application for OPT with my office first. Think of it as a two-step process. There's a lot of confusion because immigration, you know, Mark, I think you'll agree also, one of the few innovations that they've come up with that's actually positive is the online application of the OPT application from you. But where students run into problems is that they submit the OPT application with USCIS before they've gone through the process with us first. So important. And let me tell you what you're doing. The first step of the process is to apply for the OPT in our portal, in the ISSP Connect portal. You will see a request type there OPT application. That's the one you're going to use. So I'm applying 90 days, 89, 80 days prior to when I'm going to graduate. Maybe I have a job, but if I don't have a job, what do I do with it? Well, look, when you make the application with my office, it's at that point that you are choosing the start and the end date of your 12-month period that you desire. And then the end result of that process will be our issuance of an I-20 uniquely for OPT. It will have an OPT recommendation from our office, and it will carry the start and the end date that you request. So that's where, you just have to strategize, what is going to be the best start date for me based on the kinds of jobs I'm looking for, but also, as we'll talk about, the unemployment clock. So here's our timeline. I-20 end date. 90 days prior, you can begin the OPT process. And by the way, that also means you cannot submit the application to us, your first step, until it's at least 90 days prior. You can't predate, we can't predate. When you are requesting the start and end date of the OPT, here's the other metric you need. You can choose any date from the day after your I-20 ends up to 60 days, your grace period, up to 60 days after your I-20 end date. So when you're applying, let's say now or tomorrow for OPT, then you'll be choosing a date from December 17th up to 60 days after December 16th. And that is the boundaries that you have in choosing your start date. And then, of course, 12 months later for your end date. Please go to the OPT page of our website. You're going to see this as well as a full video tutorial of the process. As I mentioned, you're going to begin the OPT request process through us. An incomplete application is going to go nowhere. If your application is showing as pending, that means you didn't submit it. The next phase of your application through our portal is that it's going to go to the academic advisor, usually a professor or a dean, that you list in your OPT request. We don't receive it for processing until it passes through that faculty member, okay? When you get the OPT I-20 from us finally, you are then ready, you are then poised to submit the online application to USCIS. However, critical to bear in mind that when you get the OPT I-20 from us, it has, as it were, a shelf life of 30 days. What does that mean? It means that from the date of issuance, that is the date next to our signature, you have to submit your application to USCIS before the 30-day window expires. That is 30 days from the date of issuance. Okay, so actually, for those of you who are reading this, this is all changed in the sense that it is no longer a paper-based application. So it is still true you're going to take a US passport photo, but you only need one of them, and you're going to ultimately put it in an uploadable format. The fee is $410. As far as the I-765 goes, you are submitting to us in order to get the OPT I-20, and boy, I'm really going to emphasize this, an unsubmitted draft. In other words, don't go on USCIS, the application itself, fill it out to get the I-765, and then submit the OPT application to the ISO. No, you are going through the OPT application process fully with us. We have a link to the paper-based I-765. just make an unsigned, unsubmitted draft so we can see how you're going to fill it out, because ultimately your application to USCIS is the I-765. You're going to have an uploadable passport ID page, uploadable F1 visa stamp. That means the stamp the consulate put in your passport, not the entry stamp that you got when you came into the country. Of course, you can get your I-94 record that comes in a PDF, which can be uploadable. And it is no longer the case that you need all previous I-20s. You only need prior I-20s that were issued for CPT or OPT. Okay, this may be a lot to bear in mind, but it is all on our website. Please go there. Passport photos. And here's the beauty of again, this is just a boon as far as we're concerned, because it was a mess beforehand. Now that immigration allows the OPT application, step 2, to go through their own portal, you will file everything online. You will pay the fee to immigration immediately at the conclusion of your submission, and you get your receipt notice almost immediately. So there's no longer a question, did they get my check? Did they get my application? As soon as you submit, you pay, you get the receipt notice, then it's just a waiting game. This is important. You're going to get that OPT I-20 back from us. Remember that the OPT is based upon a specific degree level. So if, for example, you were a PhD student, but you're ending your program early, or you're graduating with a master's degree, we need to know that before you apply for the OPT with immigration. It's the same thing with the end date. Okay? Very, very important. So I-20 issued for OPT, you look it over very carefully before you submit anything to immigration. Okay, you guys know what I-20s look like. Yeah, okay, yeah. That's what the EAD looks like. So you apply with immigration. They had been marked taking about 3 to 5 months for processing. Now that it is an online based application to immigration, I can't promise this, but we're seeing some OPTs adjudicated in about a month and a half. Yeah, I mean, yes, more like 3 months, but there are students who are having miracles performed. I don't know who the new bishop of immigration is, but miracles are indeed being performed.
But never assume the miracle. Each of you should assume the longest processing
right.
time and get your applications in as early as possible.
Yeah, I can't, Mark hits it right on the head. I mean, if you're graduating in December, I hope you've already submitted it to us already. And if not, let's get it together. Okay, I-765. Again, we have this on our website. I'm not going to go through it. You don't even have to put in the NAs or none, because remember, ultimately, you're going to be submitting the I-765 online, and it's just going to show the questions that are relevant, excuse me, to your application. So forget all of that. You fill out the paper version. That's what you're uploading to us first. You get the OPT I-20, and only then are you submitting anything to USCIS. Okay. So I mentioned that already. That's what my USCIS looks like. You have to create an account. Again, my colleague who made this slide even put it in red. Get your OPT I-20 from us first before you do anything with USCIS. Nothing will happen. If you do it through USCIS without our I-20, you're never going to get OPT. All right. Yeah, request for evidence, rejections, denial. Again, that's what the EAD looks like when you're approved. When the day arrives, that your OPT begins, you will be invited into the SEVP portal. Don't ignore that email. Sometimes it does go to spam because it's a pretty strange sending address. Create this, and during your first 12 months of OPT, you will be able to change your address as well as change or enter employment. So that is absolutely critical. This is not true right now, Mark. I don't know if this is going to change at the end of this academic year. Mark and I both know that immigration relieved us of the requirement that a job has to be at least 20 hours per week because of COVID. That guidance is still in place through the end of this academic year. So we don't know if that's going to be extended beyond. But for now, I'm hoping you guys get to work 20 or more hours a week. You can work an hour a week for now and report it as employment, but the rule could change. So just be aware of that. Here is the other piece of our calculus in determining why it's important to apply early, and also the strategy involved in determining what my start and end date should be. Because within the 12-month approved period of OPT, you are permitted no more than 90 aggregate days of unemployment. So they don't have to be consecutive. That's what I mean by aggregate. That 90-day clock begins on the day the OPT is authorized according to that EAD card. Now, you gave us a recommendation for OPT. We put that recommendation on the I-20 for OPT, but ultimately it is immigration that decides what your start and end date will be. And so you have to accord with what is on the EAD, not the I-20. Here's the other important point that a lot of students miss. Unless you report your employment, immigration believes you're unemployed, and that clock is ticking. So the rule is that any change in employment or your address needs to be reported within 10 days of the occurrence. That is your legal obligation. Now, if you have a job, if you've already submitted the OPT application to us and you've got a job waiting, you don't have to wait for that 10 days to begin. You can submit an OPT employment update in our portal, and we will add the employment to your OPT, even if it's pending. Once your OPT begins and you're invited into the portal, then you have the choice of either doing it directly yourself or, again, using that same request through us. This is another big question. Can I travel when I've applied for OPT? It's a nice chart. Whatever. Let me just give it to you straight. If you travel before the end date of your I-20 ends and you return before your I-20 ends, it's just travel as usual. Valid passport for most countries, at least 6 months beyond your date of return. Valid F1 visa upon reentry. I-20 signed within, well, let's say because it's an OPT, I-20 6 months. Okay. But what happens after the end date of my I-20 is exceeded? Does travel change? Well, I'm glad I asked myself that question because it's important. Yes, travel does change. So as always, you need a valid passport. You need a valid F1 visa, unless you're from Canada. And you need an OPT I-20 signed for travel within 6 months. If your OPT is still pending, carry the receipt notice with you. If you have a job waiting for you, carry evidence of your employment. But remember, I said if your EAD is still pending, But what happens if it's approved while you're outside the United States? Well, then the rules change to option 3. Again, valid passport, valid F1 visa. The EAD is not a substitute for a valid visa. You still need one. And yes, when you're on OPT, you're still F1. OPT I-20, signed within 6 months of your date of return. You need the EAD card physically in your hands, and you need proof of employment. I'm sure we'll get a lot of questions about that, Mark. Okay. Yeah, we can talk about that if we have options. You know, I feel like this is almost like a Mark Rhoads slide, but I'm going to try to do my best with this. After your 12 months is over, what happens? I actually haven't mounted a lot of slides today about STEM, but I will talk about it. So if you're in a degree level where STEM is not available, you may decide to go back to school to get a higher degree. You could change your status if you're eligible. I'll leave that to Mark. Remember, you get a 60-day grace period. Even after your OPT, there is a 60-day grace period. Or for many of you, many of you, you will be able to apply for the STEM extension. I don't have any slides for that. I should have put them up there. So let me talk about STEM for a minute. For those of you who are eligible for STEM, you will apply once again through my office, through our portal first, for this OPT STEM extension application. Because yes, once again, you need a new I-20, this time for the STEM extension, in order to apply for that extension with USCIS. As before, you are permitted to apply up to 90 days prior to the end of your first period of OPT. You cannot apply for the STEM once your EAD expires. So 90 days prior to the expiration of the EAD, you're going to want to go back into our portal at UVA, apply for the STEM extension, get the STEM OPT I-20, and only then will you apply through USCIS. Now, yeah, if I talk about I-20 grace periods and all of that, you guys are really, we're going to go into the weeds. So let me just give you the high points. When you apply for the 12 months of OPT, you have to wait for the EAD card to be actually in your hands and the start date reached in order for you to begin work in the United States. For those of you who don't have Social Security numbers, the OPT application itself will allow you at the same time to apply for a Social Security number. For those of you who have a Social Security number, you don't apply again. It is a lifetime number. STEM is a little different. When you submit the application to immigration, timely filed, meaning you filed it before your EAD card expires, then even if that first EAD expires, that is the EAD that you got for the 12-month OPT, even if it expires, you can keep working up to 180 days or until USCIS adjudicates your application, whichever comes first. So unlike that first 12 months of OPT, where you had to wait for the EAD to be in hand, with the STEM, again, as long as you've timely filed, you can keep working even beyond the expiration of your 12-month EAD, which I have to admit, Mark, is another nice thing. Just when you think there were no gifts left, it was another nice thing from immigration. The OPT application is going to be almost identical to the application that you filed for your 12-month period of OPT, which is why I'm not going into great detail. There is some difference in the way that you fill out the I-765 first with us and then online with immigration. There is some additional evidence that immigration will require of you, a transcript or diploma showing your STEM degree, front and back copy of your EAD card. Remember that as with the 12-month period of OPT, any employer under the STEM extension has to be directly related to your major. But wait, there's more. Your employer under STEM also has to participate in USCIS's E-Verify program. And I'm sure Mark always likes to talk about that, but E-Verify, if your employer is not in the E-Verify system, they can sign up for it. It is free. It doesn't take very long. It just obligates them to vet new employees under the E-Verify system. I mean, it's really, to my mind, not much different than filing an I-9, which everybody has to do anyway. If they're not willing to do it, find another employer. And maybe, Mark, you'll speak to this as well, but we generally counsel that students cannot, unlike that first 12 months of OPT, be self-employed. There has to be an employer-employee relationship, because the STEM extension also requires a new form called the I-983, which you will submit to us as part of the application to ISO. And that is a joint application between yourself and your employer. In fact, specifically your supervisor. And of course, we can go into detail when you're ready to apply for STEM. STEM is a 24-month extension. If you are approved, then that 90 days of unemployment is inflated to 150 days throughout that 36-month period of employment. The I-983 becomes a very important document. As I said, you need it when you apply for OPT. If you leave an employer, there is a portion of that form that has to be submitted to us. And if you gain new employment, then that form in its entirety needs to be submitted to us as well. And I think I'll stop there, Mark.
All right, well, that's, let me see if I can, let's see if I can pull off this miracle.
Oh, you passed the techno challenge.
Does it work?
Beautiful.
Does it work? I can't believe it.
Perfect, Mark.
Okay, so my name is Mark Rhoads. I'm an immigration attorney. And what that means is that what I do for a living is that I work with companies and also work with universities all over the United States. And I help companies process work visas, and I help them process permanent resident green cards for international employees. And what I have up here on the screen, I think, is actually some of the most important information that you can get from the session that I'm about to do, which is my contact information and the contact information from one of the other attorneys in my office. And the reason that that is a useful bit of information is because I have some kind of anti-technology force field that causes my screen to freeze up, or I'll have a fire drill that I'll have to leave the building or something like that. My contact information is useful because after this session ends, and I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you, if you have questions that were not answered, or if you are talking to an employer and the employer has questions about the immigration process, tell them to call me or send me an email, and I'm happy to answer their questions. And I answer questions all the time for free. We have 8 immigration attorneys in my office, and we answer questions from employers and we answer questions from international students all over the United States all the time. So I encourage you to keep this information handy. Now, as I said at the outset, I work with companies all over the US helping them process work visas and permanent resident green cards. And my office processes thousands of work visas, thousands of permanent resident green cards. And one thing that I can promise you when you are out looking for a job after graduation is that most employers have no idea how this immigration process works. They don't really understand all the alphabet soup of US immigration law. They don't understand F visas and H-1Bs and Js and all this kind of stuff. So it's really going to be important for you to understand how the immigration process works so that when you are talking to an employer, you can help the employer understand how the process works. So what I'm going to do here in the next 20, 30 minutes or so is to give you the roadmap for how you can stay and work in the United States after graduation. And let me emphasize that this is really a program about post-graduation work. There are other options available to F1 students and to J1 students during your degree program. That's a topic for a different day. What I'm going to focus on today are the options that are available to you to stay and work in the US after graduation. And let's see. Okay, so what I have up here on the screen, and I've been doing these kinds of presentations for, I don't know, 25, 30 years, something like that. And I would say that of all the years that I've been practicing immigration law, this pathway that I have up here on the screen is the path that about 95% of every international student will follow to stay and work in the United States after graduation. There may be some other options floating around out there. And if you have particular bizarre circumstances and you would like to talk to me about them, you can give me a call, send me an email. But for 95% of every international student, here is the path that you are going to want to follow after graduation to stay and work in the United States. Step number one is what Richard Tanson was just talking about, and that is optional practical training. That is the first step to allow you to stay and work in the US after graduation. When you are in the last semester of your degree program, you will definitely want to pursue optional practical training. And it's a great way to get your foot in the door with an employer. And the reason that it is a great way to get your foot in the door is because the employer doesn't have to do anything. The employer doesn't have to file any paperwork. The employer doesn't have to pay any fees to the government. All the employer has to do is decide that they want to hire you. And as long as you have your optional practical training work card, you can go to work for that employer anywhere in the United States doing any job, as long as the job is related to your degree program. Every F1 student gets 12 months of OPT. If you're in a STEM degree program, you get that additional 24 months for a total of 36 months. And that's great for employers because it gives them an opportunity to evaluate you as an employee, and then they can decide whether they want to go on to further steps that will require employer involvement. OPT does not. They don't have to pay any fees. They don't have to file any paperwork. They just need to decide to hire you. And if you have that card, you can go to work. Now, while you are working using the optional practical training for either 12 months or the 36 months for STEM, you're going to want to talk to the employer about a longer term work visa. And that longer term work visa is typically, for about 95% of every international student, the H-1B, the third bullet point down. H-1B is the most common work visa in the United States. It will allow you to stay and work in the United States for up to 6 years. So you get your optional practical training work period. Then you get an additional 6 years of work authorization using the H-1B. And then it's typically during the time that you're working using H-1B that you will want to pursue a permanent resident green card if it is your desire to stay and live in the United States for a longer period of time. So that's the typical path. You get optional practical training. If you're J1, you get academic training. While you're working using your optional practical training, or for J's, the academic training, you want to talk to the employer about an H-1B. Only an employer can file an H-1B application. You can't. While you're working for the employer using the H-1B, then you can decide to pursue a permanent resident green card if that is your desire. Now, let me talk for just 2 seconds about permanent residence, because I get all kinds of students who say, I don't want to mess around with OPT. I don't want to mess around with H-1B. Lots of employers, in fact, will say on their websites that they only want to interview US citizens or permanent residents. So why can't you just get a green card? Well, the answer to that is there are only very few ways to get a permanent resident green card. And to get a permanent resident green card, it takes a very long time in most circumstances. There are basically two ways to get a green card. The first is through family relationships. If you have a family member in the United States, and that family member is either a US citizen or a permanent resident, that family member may be able to sponsor you to get a green card. Not all family members qualify. Only what they call immediate relatives, and that is a parent, a spouse, a child, or a brother or sister. So if you have a parent or a spouse or a child or a brother or sister who is a US citizen or a permanent resident, they may be able to sponsor you for a green card. If you have a family-based issue for permanent residence, send me an email, give me a call, and I'm happy to walk you through the process. Most people don't have that option, however. The other way to get a green card is through employment. That is, an employer can actually sponsor you to get a permanent resident green card. In most circumstances, an employment-based green card will take a minimum of 2 years, a minimum. And if you're from China or India, it could be 7, 8, 9 years or longer because of very limited quota backlogs. So the timing for getting a green card will rarely time out for most students when it comes to employment-based green card applications. But here's the most important thing about permanent residence based on employment, and that is you have to have an employer. No employer that I have ever worked with in all of my career has ever sponsored someone for a green card before that person was working for them. So when you're thinking about looking for a job after graduation, put the green card process out of your mind and focus on the temporary work visas that will allow you to go to work initially for the employer, impress the employer that you're worth the time and the energy of pursuing these, the permanent resident green card. And while you're working, then you can start talking to the employer about the green card process. So focus on optional practical training, then focus on the H-1B, then consider doing the permanent resident green card. Now, Mr. Tanson has already talked about the process for getting optional practical training. That is the first step that you will have to stay and work in the United States after graduation. I'm not going to go through that again. Assume that you have paid attention and you have actually worked with Mr. Tanson's office. You have applied for the optional practical training work card. You get that card in your hand. That card allows you to go to work for any employer anywhere in the United States doing any job, as long as the job is related to your degree. While you're working, you will now want to think about the next step in your journey to stay in the United States. And that is, while your OPT clock is ticking, whether it's the 12-month of OPT or the 36 months based on a STEM extension, you're going to want to think about work visa options available after that OPT expires. And H-1B is far and away the most common work visa in the United States, and it is the work visa that you will want to focus on so that you can stay and work in the US after your OPT expires. So let's talk a little bit about the H-1B. Looking back at OPT, in order to qualify for OPT, all you had to show was you're an F1 student, you're in the last semester of your degree program. You didn't even have to have a job offer. You can apply for OPT just because you're in the last semester of your program. Well, H-1B is very different. For H-1B, there are 3 essential requirements. First requirement, you have to have an employer. Only an employer can file an H-1B petition. You can't file it on your own. So step number 1, you have to have an employer. Step number 2, you have to have a degree, okay? In order to get an H-1B, you must have at least a US bachelor's degree or higher, or the foreign equivalent of a US bachelor's degree or higher. So if you are right now in an undergraduate degree program, you don't yet qualify for H-1B because you don't yet have a degree. If you are in an advanced degree program, master's, PhD, JD, MD for doctors, whatever. If you're in an advanced degree program, you already meet this requirement because you already have a degree. You have your undergraduate degree. And if you're going to go to work for a company based on your undergraduate degree, you can qualify for H-1B even now because you have a degree. So it can either be a US degree or it can be a foreign degree that is the equivalent of a US degree. And there are companies we work with all the time to determine whether a foreign degree is the equivalent of a US degree. So first requirement, got to have an employer. Second requirement, you have to have a degree. Third requirement, the degree must relate closely to the job. In other words, the degree or the job must actually require the type of degree that you have in order to do the job duties of that position. And what I recommend to students, because I get students ask me questions all the time, say, well, how am I supposed to know whether or not this job requires the type of degree that I have? Well, for certain jobs, it's easy. If you have a civil engineering degree and you're going to go to work for a civil engineering company as a civil engineer, that's an excellent H-1B because the job requires a degree and it requires the type of degree that you have. If you are graduating with an accounting degree and you're going to go to work for an accounting firm as an accountant, that's an excellent H-1B. Very clear connection between the degree and the job that you're going to do. Well, what happens if you have your accounting degree and you decide that you want to be a museum curator? You hate numbers, but you love art. Well, there you're going to have a problem doing an H-1B because there is a disconnect between the job that you want to do and the degree that you have. So what I recommend to students and what an exercise that I go through with employers all the time when I'm doing an H-1B is I tell the employer, give me a bullet point listing of the job duties. And then I go to the student and I say, pull out your degree transcript and you go through that transcript and you show me the coursework that you took that relates to each of those job duties. And if you can make a very strong correlation between your coursework and the duties of the position, then you will have a strong H-1B. If you cannot make a strong correlation between the coursework that you took and the duties of the position, you may want to start looking for another job because it may be that the job is excellent for you, but you are not going to qualify for an H-1B if you cannot show that strong correlation between the degree that you have and the duties of that position. Because the H-1B is what they call a specialty occupation visa. It is for occupations that require a specialty degree in order to do the job. So going through that exercise is a very important exercise in my view. My office processes thousands of H-1Bs and we require employers and employees to do that exercise with each application that we submit. That is also this last requirement, the relationship between the degree and the job is the single biggest reason for H-1B denials. So if you can't make that strong correlation, the Immigration Service is going to be all over the case and they will deny it if they don't believe that there's a correlation between your coursework and the job that you're going to do. One last thing about the basic requirements down at the bottom. Many employers believe that they have to advertise to see if there are qualified U.S. workers before they can proceed to file an H-1B application. The answer to that is totally false. It is a common misconception. And I tell employers all the time, and you should tell employers that you talk to, there is no need to advertise to find qualified U.S. workers before they sponsor you for H-1B. There is absolutely no advertising requirement. There is one for green card down the road, but not for the H-1B. So let's say you've talked to your employer agrees that they will pursue an H-1B application for you. We will file an application right here in the United States. The Immigration Service has taken about 5 months right now to process an H-1B petition. Once they issue the approval, you can change your status right here. You do not have to leave in order to change your status to H-1B. You can go right from F1 to H-1B based on the approval notice issued by the Immigration Service. That approval will give you initially a 3-year period of work authorization. You can then file for a 3-year extension of your H-1B for a total of 6 years. Now, there are ways to extend beyond that 6 years once you start to pursue a permanent resident green card, but that's a discussion for another day. Assume for purposes of this evening, you'll get an initial 3-year H-1B, you'll get a 3-year extension for a total of 6 years. The H-1B, once it is approved, will only allow you to work for the employer who filed the H-1B petition. When you had your OPT, you could work for multiple employers. You could work for 4 or 5 employers at the same time. H-1B only allows you to work for the employer who filed the H-1B petition, and you can only work in the job described in that H-1B petition. So does that mean that you're stuck with the same employer doing the same job for all 6 years of H-1B? No, you can change and go to a new employer, but the new employer will have to file a new H-1B petition on your behalf. And the reason for that is it may be that the first employer, the job related directly to your degree program, but maybe the second employer you're changing to, maybe the job is totally unrelated. So every time you change jobs, the Immigration Service wants to go through the exercise of evaluating whether the new job requires the type of degree that you have. So every job change will require a new H-1B petition. One of the benefits, though, of changing jobs is that you can start working with the new employer as soon as the H-1B petition is filed. You don't have to wait for an approval. And also recognize that if you change jobs during H-1B, it does not give you a new 6 years of H-1B eligibility. You get a total of 6 years, no matter how many employers you jump around to. So for example, let's say you graduate, you get a job with employer A using your optional practical training. Employer A decides to file an H-1B petition for you. Employer A will get a 3-year approval. Let's say 1 year into that job, you hate employer A, you can't wait to get out, and you find a job with employer B. Employer B can file an H-1B petition for you. Employer B will get a 3-year approval. You will have had 1 year with employer A, 3 years with employer B. That's a total of 4 years. You'll only have 2 years of H-1B eligibility remaining. So it's a total of 6 years, no matter how many employers you jump around to. So whenever I talk to employers about the H-1B process, and by the way, there is a handout that was distributed in connection with this program. It's a document that I call my Easy Guide to Hiring Foreign Graduates. I'm going to hold it up to the screen using my high-tech audio-visual aids. This Easy Guide to Hiring Foreign Graduates is a very helpful piece of paper because it talks to the employers, and I hand this out to employers all over the country. I go to lots of conferences where I speak to employers about these issues. And I hand this thing out. What I say to employers at the very top of this thing is, hey, employer, don't let fear of the simple immigration process prevent you from hiring the best and the brightest people out there. There are excellent options available for employers. Starts with the optional practical training, and then it goes to the H-1B. This Easy Guide to Hiring Foreign Graduates that is the handout for this program is an excellent summary of what I am talking about here and what Mr. Tanson talked about earlier. And I encourage you to keep that and hand it out to employers when you are talking to the employer and they have questions about how the process works. You can slide this piece of paper across the table and say, here are the basic options that are available to hire me. OPT, and then we're going to go to the H-1B. If you have questions about the process, my contact information is at the bottom, along with contact information from other attorneys in my group. And I can promise you, I've been handing this thing out for many, many years. This has helped hundreds of international students get jobs with employers who had never hired a foreign employee ever before. It's an excellent summary, and typically when the employer calls me up, if they have concerns, I can usually dispel their concerns within about 5 minutes, and they go ahead and hire an international employee, and oftentimes they go back and hire other ones. So this is a very helpful piece of paper, and I encourage you to hang on to it and hand it out when you are talking to employers. So the first question that I get, let's say an employer gets this Easy Guide, they give me a call and they say, hey, I'm talking to a great international student from UVA, want to hire this person. I understand there's this H-1B process that I have to go through. First question they say, well, what's it going to cost me? And what I tell them is, okay, there are basically 2 categories of cost for H-1B. First category is an attorney fee, my fee. Most companies do not have in-house expertise to process an H-1B petition, so they hire an outside attorney like me, and there are lots of immigration attorneys around. In our office, we charge $2,600 to process an H-1B. So the first category of costs, $2,600. Different attorneys charge different amounts, but that's what we charge. Then you get the immigration service filing fee. And there are bunches of filing fees. I've listed them up here on the screen, and I've also listed them in this easy guide to hiring foreign graduates. The short answer, the shortcut answer for the filing fee is that if you go to work for a company that has fewer than 25 employees, the government filing fee is $1,710. You go to work for an employer with more than 25 employees, the government filing fee is $2,460. So let's assume you go to work for an employer with more than 25 employees. My fee is $2,600. Government filing fee, $2,460. So it's a little over $5,000 to process an H-1B. Many employers get all kinds of wrong information about the cost of the H-1B. I've had employers who've said to me, well, I heard it cost $10,000, $15,000. If that's the case, I'm probably charging too little, but in the end, the cost is going to be around $5,000. And it's important for you to understand that so that you can help explain to the employer what the costs are. A very important point about the cost of the H-1B, and that is the government considers the cost, my fee and the government filing fee, as an employer expense. The employer cannot have you pay that expense. If the employer requires you to pay the expense of the H-1B, they can be fined by the federal government. And if there's ever an audit, the government is going to make the employer pay you back. So, but let's say you go to talk to an employer and the employer says, well, I'll do the H-1B, but that $5,000 seems like a lot and I don't want to pay it. You pay it. Is that a problem for your status if you pay the H-1B fee? No, it's not a violation of your status. It's a problem for the employer, but it's not a violation of your status. So go ahead, if that's actually a requirement, pay it, get the H-1B, and proceed further. But let me tell you something also about the cost, and that is in my practice, and we probably processed, I don't know, 30,000 H-1Bs out of my office over the years. I can probably count on one hand the number of employers who were concerned about these costs. Most employers do not care about the cost of the H-1B. They see it as basically a recruiting expense. It's just like advertising for a position or paying a signing bonus or paying moving expenses. Employers are willing to absorb these costs if they want to hire the best and the brightest talent out there. So cost is not really an issue for most employers, and it shouldn't be an issue for you. But what is an issue for employers, and what is definitely an issue for you, is this H-1B quota. And the quota and the H-1B lottery are things that you really need to fully understand in order to give yourself the best opportunity to get an H-1B after your OPT expires. So even though the H-1B is the most popular work visa in the United States, there is a limited quota on the number that the government can issue every single year. And that quota is 85,000. So every single year, the government has 85,000 new H-1Bs that they can issue. And I emphasize new, because once you get your first H-1B, you never have to worry about this quota ever again. It only applies to individuals getting an H-1B for the very first time, like people graduating from university and using their OPT. Once you get the H-1B, if you, let's say, change employers, you can file a new H-1B petition with a new employer anytime, even if the quota is all gone. Doesn't make any difference. Quota doesn't apply to you. If you have an H-1B and you're filing for your second extension of your H-1B, quota doesn't apply to you. It only applies the very first time you get the H-1B. So that 85,000 quota becomes available every year on October 1st. Every year, October 1, 85,000 new H-1Bs become available, and the quota year ends September 30 of the following year. So the quota year that we are in now started October 1 of 2022. It will end September 30 of 2023. So we are right now about, 12 days into the quota year. That quota is divided into two different buckets. There is a bucket of 20,000 H-1Bs available just to individuals who have a U.S. advanced degree. That is, an advanced degree, anything above a bachelor's degree, master's, PhD, JD for lawyers, MD for doctors. If you have an advanced degree from a U.S. college or university, you have a special quota of 20,000 H-1Bs available just for you. Then there is the regular quota of 65,000. That's for everybody else. So if you have a PhD from China, well, that's not a U.S. advanced degree, so you're in the 65,000 quota. If you have a master's degree from Canada, that's not a U.S. advanced degree, so that's in the 65,000 quota. You have a bachelor's degree from the United States, 65,000 quota. Only individuals with a U.S. advanced degree are in the 20,000 quota. But does it matter which quota you get your H-1B? No, it's not like the advanced degree is a golden H-1B, gives you extra miles with every purchase. It's the same H-1B, so you don't care which of these quotas you get into, and I'm going to talk about how these quotas work in just a second. So the quota is released every year on October 1. About 12 days ago, 85,000 H-1Bs became available. Anybody have any idea how many of those H-1Bs remain today? Zero. In fact, all 85,000 were taken on October 1st, the very first day that they became available. And the reason that they all were taken on October 1st is because employers can pre-file to get an H-1B quota number. So let's look at how you pre-file so that you can understand how to give yourself the best opportunity to get an H-1B. So this chart that I have up here on the screen, it shows the H-1B quota year in the shaded area. The quota year starts October 1 and it goes all the way over to September 30. The quota is released on October 1, but employers know, and now you know, that you can pre-file to get a quota number. And you can pre-file during a special pre-registration period that happens March of every single year. The screen that I have up here, the time frame in March where this pre-registration period commences changes every single year. The year that this slide was made, the pre-registration period ran from March 1 to March 18. But again, it changes every year. So the dates in March for the pre-registration will be different. Immigration Service usually announces it sometime in February when the pre-registration period will take place. So I encourage you either to contact my office or to contact to monitor the Immigration Service website to see when the H-1B pre-registration period will commence and when it will end. During that pre-registration period, in my example, March 1 through 18, any employer that wants to file an H-1B petition needs to file this pre-registration. They can file it anytime within that 18-day period. It doesn't matter. You don't have to get it in on the very first day to give yourself a better chance. Anytime within that registration period, the employer will file a very basic registration application. It will give basic information about the company, and it will give basic information about you. It has to be for a defined H-1B candidate. You'll have to submit information about your passport identification, your country of birth, other information directly about you. We submit this pre-registration period to this pre-registration application to the Immigration Service during the pre-registration period. During the pre-registration period, all employers that want to file an H-1B are going to do this pre-registration. At the end of the pre-registration period, the Immigration Service will assemble all of the H-1B registrations that were submitted. And then they will perform a lottery to pull out registrations that they will allow to apply for an H-1B petition. Well, why do they have to do a lottery? They have to do a lottery because during that registration period, every single year, the Immigration Service gets far more registrations for the H-1B than they have H-1B quota numbers. This past year, in March of 2022, for the quota that became available on October 1, Immigration Service received over 420,000 registrations for the 85,000 quota. So they take all 420,000 of those registrations. And the first thing they do is they segregate out all the advanced degree registrations. They don't really give any numbers for how many were actually submitted, but let's assume that there were 100,000 out of that 420,000 were advanced degree cases. Of those 100,000, they will count out 20,000, which is the advanced degree quota. Then they take all the remainder and they plunk it back into the pile and they mix it all up again. And then they count out 65,000. So if you have an advanced degree, you get 2 chances in this H-1B lottery. And if you have a STEM extension of your OPT, if you're not selected one year, you get 2 chances the next year, and then you get 2 chances the year after that. So you have 2 chances at least if you have an advanced degree. But if you have a bachelor's degree, you'll have 1 chance in this lottery. 420,000 pre-registrations go in, 85,000 cases are selected to process. After the government does this random lottery, they will notify individuals whether they have been selected by April 1. So the pre-registration happens in March. Government assembles all the pre-registrations, they do the lottery, and they will notify you by April 1 whether your case was selected. If the case was selected in the lottery, then you have 90 days to file your H-1B petition. You can file at any time within that 90 days, but here is a very important new rule with regard to H-1Bs and the registration, and that is you do not yet have to have the degree that you are going to rely on for your H-1B during the registration process. So let's say you're in an advanced degree program that will end in May. Well, the registration period is in March. You don't yet have your degree, but as long as you will have your degree by the time you file your H-1B petition, then you can file in the advanced degree quota. So as long as you will have your advanced degree by the time you file the H-1B, you can do the pre-registration in the advanced degree quota. Similarly, if you are in your bachelor's degree program, but you don't yet have your degree, but you will have your degree by the time you file your H-1B petition, then you can go ahead in the pre-registration period in March prior to obtaining your degree in order to get yourself the best chance of getting an H-1B quota number. So that's a new rule that was just implemented a couple of years ago. So let's take a look and see how this thing works actually in practice. Now, there are some students who may have an employer who's willing to sponsor them before they even graduate. If that's the case, as I said, they can file in the pre-registration period even before you get your degree, as long as you will get it by the time you file the H-1B petition. But for most students, the employer's not going to want to, they're not going to want to go through the H-1B process until you start to work for them and you prove to the employer that you're worth the time, the investment of the time and the money to do the H-1B. So let's say you graduate in May. Okay, the H-1B pre-registration has already occurred. That occurred back in March. So you're not going to get an H-1B the year that you graduate. So if you graduate in May of 2023, you haven't had an employer sponsor you, how are you going to stay and work in the United States after graduation? Well, you've got to get OPT. OPT is your ticket to stay and work, because you're going to go to work after graduation using the OPT, and you're going to want to start looking to the registration period the following year. So you go to work after graduation, you get to June, to July, you get to October 1, the quota's released, you don't care, you didn't have an H-1B anyway. You get to January 1 of the year after you graduate, you see that March pre-registration period looming on the horizon. You're going to want to talk to the employer about filing the pre-registration in the March after you graduate. So the employer files the pre-registration, and I usually encourage students and employers to contact my office late January or early February so we can get the pre-registration process underway. We file your pre-registration during the registration period in March. Immigration Service will assemble all of the registrations. They'll do the lottery, count out 85,000. They'll let us know by April 1 whether the case was selected. If your case was selected, we then have 90 days to file the H-1B petition. We can file it right away because you already have your degree. So we file the H-1B petition. Immigration Service right now is taking about 5 months to process an H-1B. So we'll know by the time September 30 rolls around whether or not your H-1B is approved. If your H-1B is approved, it will become effective on October 1st. It will not be effective earlier than that. But you can continue to work using your OPT. Even if your OPT started in May right after you graduate, and it expires May the year after you graduate, you can continue to work using your OPT as long as you have filed an H-1B petition before your OPT expires. So that's a very important benefit that the immigration has given us called gap relief, allowing you to continue uninterrupted employment up until October 1. And on October 1, your approved H-1B will become effective. Then you will have your 3 years of work authorization followed by the additional 3-year H-1B extension. Well, let's say that that you did not get selected in the lottery. Are there other options that may be available to you? Well, let me buzz through them really quickly. If you go to work for one of these organizations up on the screen, these organizations are totally exempt from the quota. They can file an H-1B petition anytime. So if you go to work for a university, or you go to work for a nonprofit organization affiliated with a university, or a nonprofit research organization, or a governmental research organization, they can file an H-1B anytime, regardless of the quota. But these are the only organizations exempt from the quota. Everybody else is subject to the H-1B quota. This screen gives other types of visa options that may be available other than the H-1B. Very common options include, if you are a citizen of one of the countries across the top of the screen, Canada, Mexico, Chile, Singapore, Australia, there are excellent options available to you. If you have questions about how to get a work visa and you are from one of those countries, you still want to get your OPT, but then there are other options other than H-1B that are available to you. These other options are extremely limited, and I'm happy to talk to individuals who have questions perhaps about the L1 or about the E. But for most students, you are not going to qualify for an L, you're not going to qualify for an E. If you don't get the H-1B in the H-1B quota lottery, most students just re-enroll in a degree program to get a different degree or an advanced degree, or they simply depart the United States, go back to their home country. And this is the part of the program that is always a little depressing for me, because this H-1B quota is a serious problem. But it's not going to go away. So you have to understand how the H-1B quota system works, how the lottery works, and the timing for getting your H-1B registration in to give yourself the best chance of getting one of those H-1B quota numbers. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather, and we can open this up for questions.
All right, wonderful. Thank you both so much. This is a great overview, and well, not an overview, really almost like an overview and a deep dive on a lot of different topics that I know our students were asking questions about in the chat. So far, Dreama and I together have been able to answer 38 students' questions, or to let them know that it was being answered live by either one of you. But we do have 48 questions that are in the chat. I know we will not be able to get to all of these, so I'm going to try to prioritize them by ones that I know are maybe more open-ended, ones that might apply to multiple students. There are several students who have asked about their particular situations. I'm not sure if some of them are still here, so I'm going to try to somewhat prioritize these, because I do want to value and respect both of your times and not really go past 6:30 or too much past 6:30. So one person asked, and I realize the answer to this is not necessarily going to be a document, but they asked, what document is needed when an employer asks, are you lawfully permitted to work in the US? I know that obviously on Handshake or other job applications, sometimes the question is, are you legally authorized to work in the US? So how would students answer that question? And do they need some type of documentation?
Well, that question typically, there are two parts to it. The first question is, are you legally authorized to work in the United States for any employer? Well, if you have OPT, the answer to that is yes, you are legally authorized to work for any employer. And you can demonstrate that with your OPT work card. But the follow-up question typically says, will you now or in the future require employment visa sponsorship? And if you are using OPT, you will require employment visa sponsorship. And in my experience, don't play hide the ball with that. Let employers know that you're probably going to require H-1B sponsorship. Many employers will discontinue discussions. Let's be clear. Many large employers have policies where they simply won't pursue H-1B because they get plenty of US applicants. And what I encourage international students to do is to look for smaller to mid-size employers. Smaller to mid-size employers do not have access to the very tippy top US talent. And because of that, they're very open to discussing visa sponsorship for talented international students. So focus on small to mid-size employers.
Wonderful, thank you. This might be a question for Richard, and I realize this might be a nuanced conversation student by student. How can we tell if our work is related to our major? Are there any criteria for this when determining, obviously, if your job is closely enough affiliated with your degree of study?
I think the way that I look at it is as follows. It should be fairly intuitive. I mean, there should be a fairly obvious connection, like Mark said, a civil engineer doing civil engineering. You have to remember your audience. You know, you're not talking to academics and trying to convince them of the the connection between your job and your major. Your audience is immigration officers with varied experiences. The common advice that we give also, I should say, first of all, we're always looking at what your academic advisor writes in the OPT application in terms of relevance. But if there isn't this intuitive connection, and I'm waiting for Mark to pile on this one, but when there isn't an intuitive connection, what we typically advise our students is secure a letter from your employer documenting the nature of the employment and its relation to your major field of study. Tuck it in your pocket, in your back pocket, just in case immigration comes calling, or maybe at the time that a firm like Mark's is filing for H-1B.
And Mark, anything to add there?
No, I think just and then doing the exercise of looking at the job duties and comparing them to your degree coursework is an essential exercise.
Great. Richard, this will be another question for you. We did review it earlier, but I realize sometimes students just want to make sure they're understanding correctly. So when looking at applying for OPT, if they're graduating in May, when is the earliest they can submit that application?
If you're graduating in May, the graduation date is May 21st. You can apply 90 days prior to that date, no earlier, but shouldn't be much later either.
Great. And if students are interviewing for jobs, do they need to wait to get an offer before applying?
No, OPT,
Exactly.
In fact, they shouldn't wait.
Yes.
We don't know which job you're going to take, and OPT itself does not require a job in order to make the application, because the processing times for immigration vary. I would say sooner rather than later. That's the best counsel.
Great. Now, this next question might kind of have two parts to it. Again, I know that we've answered the first half of this, but maybe just going back over would be helpful because there's several questions related to this. I know that OPT has to be related to my major. Do I have to be in that job for the entire 12 months? So let's just maybe discuss that briefly again.
Yeah. So bear in mind that throughout your period of OPT, the first 12 months, you are entitled to no more than 90 days of unemployment. So, does that mean you have to work all 12 months? As long as you don't exceed those 90 days of unemployment, then you are satisfying the underlying requirements for OPT eligibility. So it's basically 365 minus, let's say, 80 days to be safe. And
Mhm.
that's basically the time you have to work.
Okay. And the follow-up is, what if I switch within 12 months to a job that's in another field? And by another field,
Every job that you take. So look, as Mark said, OPT first 12 months is not bound to any specific employer. It's
Right.
not like the H-1B at all. It is not a benefit through sponsorship. You are the petitioner, not an employer. So you can work as many jobs as you like, 10 in a row, 10 at the same time, as long as every single one is directly related to the major.
excellent. After we get an H-1B and we do want to change employers, and Mark, you had talked about this, are we still considered as, quote, require sponsorship for the new job?
Yeah, anytime you change to a new employer, the new employer has to file an H-1B petition, which means that they are the H-1B sponsor. I talk to employers all the time about this word sponsor. It doesn't mean that they're adopting you. It doesn't mean that they're responsible for putting you up if you get kicked out of your apartment or paying traffic tickets if you run a red light. All sponsorship means is that they are filing an application saying that you are going to work for them in a particular job. That's it.
Great. Wonderful. I know that, the majors in engineering, we know that those are STEM related and for STEM extension. And I know that several schools or departments at UVA have asked questions and maybe petitioned to be considered STEM eligible. Richard or Mark, is there an easy way for students at UVA to know if their major or their graduate program is STEM eligible, if it's outside of engineering especially?
I mean, yes, there's an easy way. There is a list of eligible majors. And what we look at, I mean, frankly, the best way is to either ask us or the department.
Great.
Most of them are pretty obvious. If you're in engineering, you're going to be considered. And like the others, there are some majors which would seem to be eligible or should be eligible for STEM that aren't, like medicine. But there are also programs of study at the university that have petitioned the Commonwealth of Virginia to change their zip code to a STEM eligible status. And those students would certainly know that I would hope
Okay,
that they're
great.
eligible.
We did have questions, from the MSc program within commerce. Someone from economics asked, and then the computer science.
Econ and commerce are both STEM
Okay,
at University of Virginia, not everywhere.
okay.
Obviously, computer science in the engineering school is a STEM field.
And what about computer science in the College of Arts and Sciences?
Doesn't matter. So yeah, so it
Great.
doesn't matter that it's in the college. Again, what the government is, so if you guys all look at your I-20s, you're going to notice that there's a code next to it. That's called a CIP code, a CIP code. And so there is a list of all of the codes that are eligible for STEM. Very easy to find on the internet, or we can point you in the appropriate direction. So again, insofar as the government is looking at the CIP code, which is the same, whether it's engineering or in the college, they're fine.
Wonderful. I'm going to see if I can find another one or two questions.
This should be like stump the band, Mark. I mean, we haven't been.
Well, I'm asking some of these general ones that, have been more applicable to a variety of people. All right, so I'm going to ask someone's very specific question now. I am graduating this year and I would like to apply for OPT. When I graduate from my undergraduate program, I applied for OPT, but I entered another F1 program before my application got reviewed. So USCIS withdrew my OPT application when they were processing it. Should I mention this in my form I-765? Did the way I read it straight up. Does that make sense to you?
I understand the question.
Okay, great.
So, and then I'll wait also for Mark's answer. My answer would be no.
No, I totally agree.
Okay.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. I am an MBA student at Darden, graduating next spring. I heard from some people that our future employers can already start applying for our H-1B in March 2023 before our graduation. Is it possible? Anything we should be aware of if we want to try this? And Mark, I believe that you talked about that a little bit
Okay.
earlier. I think a few people have asked that question, so maybe if you wouldn't mind just in a few sentences,
Yeah.
kind of summarizing how that works again.
Yeah, so you can definitely apply in the registration period before you have your MBA,
Right.
as long as you will be able to file the H-1B if you're selected in the lottery within the 90 days of getting selected. So let's look at the example. You're going to graduate in May. The registration happens in March. You don't yet have your MBA at the time of the registration. The employer can still file as long as you will get your MBA by May. So if you take this gamble and you do the registration based on your MBA, you better study hard to make sure that you get that MBA when you graduate in May. If your case is selected in the lottery, you'll know by April 1. You need to file an H-1B petition within 90 days of April 1. That's after your May graduation date. You get your MBA, you then file the H-1B petition, you're fine.
Excellent. I think I'm going to ask one more question, and we have so many other good ones here, about 44 or 43, but I've copied and pasted all of those into a document. I might share those with you, Richard and Mark, afterwards, just so you know the types of questions that our students were answering.
Sure.
If you do have quick links or quick answers to any of those, students who are here, I will follow up with you next week, but I definitely will share those with Mark and Richard so they know.
Sure. And
So
I
this-
would also say, make sure that you have reviewed our website thoroughly
Yes.
on OPT and on STEM. OPT, there's a lot of information there, and I presume that a lot of your questions would be answered, and I think everybody knows how to make an appointment with us as well.
Perfect. Yes, Dreama did snag some of the content from your website and use that to answer several of our students' questions tonight, which is great. Now, I'm not sure if this next question, if we would need more data points on if this externship was paid or unpaid. So it's a student in the architecture school. They're a graduate student and they're in their first year.
Mhm.
The school offers a program to do an externship during the winter break. However, I've been told that as an international student, I'm not able to do the externship. Is there another option for me to do something similar to an externship this winter break?
The only option for a first-year student is to work at UVA. So if there's a job on grounds that would give them useful experience, they can certainly do that. So it's actually a good question in this sense, just to remind students that you're not eligible for OPT or CPT for that matter until you've been in status for one academic year.
Wonderful.
That's the reason why this student is ineligible. It's just one semester so far. Not even that.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Thank you all so much. Like I said, we do see several other questions, so I'm going to try to copy and paste a few of those before I officially close the webinar so I can share them with you all. So
Okay. And
students.
I can stay a little bit longer if students have questions.
Okay.
If you have, if there are specific H-1B related or green card related questions, because the CPT and OPT questions, Richard can handle those.
Absolutely.
Just on the daily. So they have access to an attorney right now. Let's look at some of those questions.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yep.
If my spouse gets an H-1B visa, can they sponsor me?
Well, you'll get, as a spouse of an H-1B, you'll get a dependent visa status called H-4. It does not allow any work in the United States. So even if your spouse gets an H-1B, you may want to maintain your F-1 status so you have an opportunity to use OPT and then to pursue your own H-1B.
Absolutely.
That makes sense. Okay. If I have an H-1B in a position at the university and I want to change it to a company,
Yep.
oh, should I reuse the OPT, or can I immediately apply H-1B in the new company?
Well, once you change to H-1B, you no longer have OPT. You've changed your status, you lose your OPT.
Right.
To change to a private employer, you will have to go through the whole lottery system. Your employer is going to have to do a registration. You're going to have to try to get selected in the H-1B lottery. You should stay with your current employer until that process is ended. If you're selected in the lottery, you file the H-1B petition. It will be approved as of October 1. Then you can change.
Yep.
Great. If the goal is to
Hey,
apply
Heather.
for, oh, yes,
Sorry, I wanted to ask a question that I often get asked, and
Sure.
being an international student, or used to be an international student myself, I've seen this question come up multiple times as well. So students a lot of times struggle that why can't they go directly from an F1 visa to a permanent residency or a green card?
Oh,
And so understanding that it's a student, like the transition from a student visa to a residential visa. So if you can address that.
yeah, I mean, Mark can speak to why the H-1B is so valued as a so-called dual intent visa status.
Well, I mean, can you, in theory, go from being an F1 student to getting a permanent resident green card? Yes, in theory.
Yeah.
So let's look at how the theory plays out. If you have a family member, let's say you're engaged to a U.S. citizen, that's a great way to get a green card. I mean, there are obvious drawbacks to that, but if you're engaged to a U.S. citizen, you get married, you can get a green card based on marriage. And I would encourage, if you are engaged, give me a call, send me an email, I'll talk you through the process. But assuming you don't have a family member, the other way to get a permanent resident green card is through an employer. So the first thing you have to do is get an employer. And to get an employer, you're either going to have to use OPT or you're going to have to get the H-1B. Talk to the employer about a permanent resident green card. The process for getting a green card at a minimum is going to be 2 years, a minimum. So most individuals who have OPT aren't going to have enough time. If you have a STEM extension, yeah, in theory, you could probably get a green card within that 3-year STEM OPT period. If you are from China or India, the processing time for getting a green card is not 2 years. It is going to be 5 years, 6 years. From India, it could be 10, 12 years. You will have to get the H-1B in order to stay in the United States and continue to work while you're processing the permanent resident green card. Filing for a green card doesn't give you any status in the United States. You have to maintain an underlying temporary visa status like the H-1B or F1 while you're pursuing a permanent resident green card. So in theory, you can. In practice, it is extraordinarily rare for an international student to jump right from F1 to getting a green card unless you have a family member who's willing to sponsor you.
Couldn't agree more.
excellent. Another question, H-1B related. If the goal is to apply for a job at a university and be sponsored by the university for an H-1B, can we get the H-1B whenever? Meaning, if you're looking, I guess, at some of those non-lottery orgs, is there some type of time frame that people should consider?
You can apply. What I usually recommend, if you're going to work for a university or another of those organizations exempt from the quota, use as much of your OPT as you want and then apply for the H-1B, because you can apply anytime.
Excellent. I'm going to keep bringing the H-1B questions. Is it possible to change the start date of H-1B validation?
Well, if you're looking at the lottery, your H-1B is going to be effective as of October 1. You're not going to be able to get it effective any earlier, and
Okay.
you won't be able to get it effective any later. If you want to play around with the start date of the OPT, of the H-1B, you have to file it requesting that it not be effective until you go outside the United States, get a visa, and come back in. Don't play games. Just take it as of October 1.
Okay. Where did that question go? So if the student's going to graduate in May 2023 and they are a STEM student, how many lotteries can I actually try if my employer is not willing to apply for the H-1B this coming March?
If the employer isn't going to sponsor you before you graduate, then the first time you're going to be able to go through the process is the year after you graduate. That's the first time. If you're not selected, and if you have the STEM extension, you get the next year, and then you get the year after that. So you'll get 3 chances in the H-1B lottery.
Excellent. Is it difficult? So I haven't read these through, but we might have already answered some. Is it difficult to switch from an H-1B that is obtained from an exempt organization to an H-1B for a non-exempt? For instance, PhD
Well, I
in
think
STEM.
Mark just
Yeah,
answered that.
Yeah, same issue. if you're exempt and you're going to a TAP subject employer, you have to go through the lottery process.
Right.
Perfect. While on H-1B, I would like to work part-time, for example, as a lecturer. What are my options?
You'd have to get an H-1B with whoever you're going to lecture for. You can only work for the employer who sponsors you. If you're going to work for anybody else, you have to get a different H-1B. You can get a concurrent H-1B, but you're going to have to get a different H-1B in order to undertake those duties.
And I think several students have had this question. I believe we addressed it a moment ago, but just to be very clear, someone asked, is OPT still valid if I get H-1B at the university? And we talked about once you get H-1B, forget the OPT.
Yeah,
like the OPT.
the fundamental, really the fundamental issue here is you can only have one visa status at a time.
Right.
That's it.
And once you change from F to H-1B, you lose all of your F1 benefits.
Yep.
Great. I think I see one more H-1B. If I have EAD because of TPS, can I apply for H-1B from that?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me do a quick scroll. I believe we've answered, hold on. Yes, we answered that one as well. I believe we've answered our H-1B questions. I apologize to someone if I might have missed yours, but I believe those are our H-1B questions for now, Mark. And you had graciously offered it earlier as well. If students have any follow-up questions or their employer, their potential employer has questions, they can always call or email you, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, wonderful. Mark, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And we know that we'll see you again at the university, I'm sure soon.
That's all right. Sounds good. Thank you very much
All right,
for
thank
organizing this,
you.
and have a good evening.
All right.
Mark.
And Richard, how about
Yeah.
you? Do you want to look at a couple more questions
Sure.
together? Okay, great. Dreama, feel free. I know you've been looking at the questions as well. Are there any that you would want to recommend that we pose to Richard? I see one here is about OPT. And again, forgive me, I don't always know the full context behind the question, Richard. My OPT will be longer than my visa. Should I leave the country and get a new F1 visa?
So great question. A reminder to everyone that the visa has no bearing or contribution to your legal status whatsoever. It is only used to enter the United States. So if you don't leave the US, then you're not compelled to get a new visa. If you leave the US while still F1 and you intend to return after the visa expires, then yes, you would need to get a new F1 visa at a US consulate before you return to the United States. But carrying an expired visa while in the United States has no consequence.
If my I-20 ends May 2024, and I'm going to graduate on May 2023, should I shorten my I-20 and apply for OPT?
Yes, absolutely. So what you would do is just have a conversation with us before you apply for OPT, let's say next February, early March. Tell us you're going to graduate in May. We'll shorten your I-20 so that when you apply for OPT, it'll be based on the May 2023 graduation date.
Great. And I saw this question earlier and I meant to ask this, so I'm glad I saw it again. If I have 2 STEM majors during my undergraduate study, can I apply for OPT STEM extension twice for a total of 4 years after that 1 year ends?
I'd never heard that one before.
Okay.
That's hilarious. Well, no, but yes. How's that? So you're only going to get 1 STEM extension per OPT. So when you've had your 12 months of OPT, you get to apply for another 24 months based on either of your STEM majors. However, you are allowed to apply for STEM twice per lifetime. So if you get a higher degree that, let's say, is not STEM eligible, and you find a job that is related to a prior STEM degree, then you could potentially use that other major for the second STEM. It's unusual, Doesn't really happen, but theoretically it's possible.
This is
But
interesting.
no.
Thank you to the student that asked that question. That was
Yeah.
really interesting. Thanks, Richard.
Yeah.
That's my new nugget for today.
Heather, there was one more that I got asked today at
Sure,
my
please.
writing. So there's one, and it's probably something you guys have addressed before, but it would be a good reminder. Can I start on my OPT? Can I start my job before I graduate if I have my OPT in hand while
No.
writing my dissertation?
No.
Yeah.
So remember what I said. When you apply through our office, you're going to ask us to make a recommendation as to your start and end date of OPT. For the STEM extension, the dates are automatic. It's just the day after your first OPT expires and then 24 months. For the first 12 months of OPT, you cannot work until the EAD card is in your hands and the start date on the card is reached. So that's not going to be, so in other words, from the time this is great for graduate students, Priya, from the time your OPT ends until the start date on the EAD card begins, you cannot work anywhere, including UVA. So the end date on your I-20 ends all employment. After that date, there is no such thing as on-grounds employment. There is simply employment. And in order for you to engage in employment, no matter where it is, you have to have an EAD card that has reached its effective date. So the answer is no, Priya.
Thank you. Here's one that I really like this one. I'm currently working at UNC Chapel Hill during my OPT STEM extension, which will expire in July 2023. Am I allowed to change my job to a startup founded by a UNC professor? The startup is majorly founded by SBIR NIH. What should I report to you if I start to work in the startup sometime next month?
Yeah. So remember, again, I know I threw a lot of information at you guys, so I'll repeat this. When you're on the STEM extension, if you change employment, it requires the final evaluation from the form I-983 sent to us. And then when you begin new employment, then a new I-983. One of the different features of the STEM extension is, remember I told you about the SCVP portal where you could change your address and your employment by yourselves. When you're on STEM, however, only we can change your employment, and we will not do it without the forms required from the form I-983. Good question.
Great. There's one maybe final question I'll ask you, and then some of these are about sponsorship for family members and other things that I think I'll send you all an email.
And
know we've
students can make appointments with us. So that's the easiest way
absolutely,
to
yes.
do it.
Every student here should have an international student advisor from your office, correct, Richard?
Yeah, we have, what do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4 advisors that serve our international student and scholar community. It's very easy to make an appointment with us. We have very robust hours. And all our appointments, unless you specify, are by Zoom. So you can be anywhere.
Great. Now, I know we've addressed if a student and their employer were to win the H-1B lottery, right, that their OPT or their STEM extensions then forfeit. They're on the H-1B lottery. Is there a means?
That's not correct.
Okay.
So winning the lottery simply means that your employer can file a petition on your behalf within 90 days from April 1st.
Sure.
More to Mark's point, if you have an H-1B that's based on a future degree, then your employer would wait until you have your degree within that 90-day period in order to file the petition. If you're filing an H-1B petition that is cap dependent, then that H-1B will not go into effect until October 1st. It may get approved in May, it may get approved in June, but the effective date of the H-1B will still be October 1st.
Right.
So you will have your F1 OPT or your F1 STEM OPT running all the way until September 30th, and then
Oh,
The
that's what,
status-
yeah. So I
yeah,
didn't mean
and
that.
then the
So
status changes.
yeah, so
to,
that's not what I meant, but thank you for clarifying
yeah.
that for sure. This person, part of the second part of their question was, well, if I do get H-1B and it's approved, but I still have a year of OPT left, is there a way to like
No, you won't regain it.
delay it or something?
No,
Okay,
no.
that's
So
kind of what I meant by
yeah,
the
no, that's a
forfeit.
that's a great question too. One thing to remember is that OPT and STEM OPT are direct benefits of F1 status, which means they're based upon an active and continuous F1 status. Once you go to H-1B, you have no F from which to apply for OPT. And if you're also asking, well, what if I go to a higher degree level where I'm then eligible for another period of OPT? Do I get these rollover minutes? Sorry, no.
All right, great. Thank you so much, everyone. I think we're going to end that there. Just please know that I have taken these questions and I am emailing them to myself so I can look through those, tidy that up again, and share that with Richard and Mark soon. So we appreciate you all being here. Obviously, Richard mentioned you can reach out to him and make an appointment with his team. If you're looking to talk with a career advisor, of course, you can meet with the career advisor that serves your school, your department. And then, of course, if you have some questions for Mark, you're welcome to ask him as well. I will have this recording ready for you maybe very early next week, along with some of these questions. So please check your email and look for a follow-up from me, Heather Palmer, and we'll make sure that you get all of these resources. Thank you again, everyone, for making tonight, carving out time for us tonight. And Richard, again, thank you so much for your time and
You're very
expertise. We
welcome,
really
Mary.
appreciate you.
Sure. Bye.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful night. Thank you.